Hey everyone, it's Monday, October 1st. Nice day here in Montreal. For those of you who haven't been here before, my name is Derek Royden. I usually write an article every week for a website called nationofchange.org, and I try to do one of these vlogs as well. So for today's story, I'm using kind of an unusual source I've never used before. I don't think I've ever read it before. It's called Special Ops Magazine. It's an article by Ty Joplin and Al Bawaba, and it's titled Mapping Eric Prince's Private Mercenary Empire. This is a kind of an issue that I've been looking at a little bit over the last few years, the kind of rise of privatized military. Of course, Eric Prince is well known as the founder of Blackwater, um, and he's been kind of on a tour around the world. Now, we should say that this kind of privatization effort didn't start with Eric Prince. There was, I believe, a South African company called Executive Decisions, formed kind of right after apartheid ended, and there have been other different mercenary groups, but certainly Blackwater, probably now I think it's called Academy, went through a couple name changes due to the terrible things that the people who work for Blackwater did in Iraq. And for some reason, this Eric Prince character, who is really the scion of extremely wealthy family, now wealthier because his sister, Betsy DeVos, married into the DeVos fortune. She's actually the Secretary of Education, unbelievably, under Donald Trump. She does not believe in public education. She believes in charter schools or the privatization of schools, and her brother believes in the privatization of war, a dangerous and ridiculous thing that is only growing. So, kind of mapping Prince's life, they begin in the United States. Born in an affluent Michigan family, his family maintained deep ties to the Republican establishment and several conservative religious organizations like American Values. Prince's sister, Betsy DeVos, married into one of the most influential political families in the Midwest, the DeVosses, and began helping run the Republican Party machine in Michigan. That marriage, which tied the Prince and DeVos families together, has given Eric unprecedented political access into the federal government. His list of close allies, including Steve Bannon, U.S. President Donald Trump's former chief strategist, and of course his sister gives him direct access to President Trump himself. Prince was a former Navy SEAL, and he established Blackwater in 1997. Once the U.S. invaded Iraq in 2003, Blackwater received billions in contracts from the U.S. government to help supplement the official mission with private boots on the ground, relatively free from accountabilities or laws from any particular government. This is one of the big problems with this, is that in the system of military justice, of course, it doesn't always work as promised, but there is accountability for at least people who say commit atrocities in a place like Afghanistan or Iraq. For these private military contractors, for the most part, there seems to be no mechanism in place to hold people responsible. So, as many people remember, in Iraq, Blackwater's activities are infamous and account for Prince's self-imposed exile from the United States. Now, even with everything that happened with Blackwater, Eric Prince is still often invited onto television shows. He's often interviewed in magazines and on websites and in other places for some of his, I call them cockamamie schemes, like trying to set up a private army in Afghanistan. This is something that has been pushed by Prince since the beginning of the Trump administration. It's an incredibly dangerous thing to try to privatize an entire war effort and to promise people that it will be over in a very short period of time, when of course no company enters into a contract like this. No company would enter into a contract like this unless they could kind of keep it going. And I do believe that that would be ultimately, that's the goal, is to set up a private army in Afghanistan and continue reaping the rewards and profits of that for conceivably forever. Apart from harassing Iraqi civilians and running them off the roads with their armored personnel carriers, they also indiscriminately gunned down 14 innocent people, this is Blackwater, in Baghdad in 2007, drawing an investigation and heavy criticism from media outlets around the world. The incident stands as a cautionary tale for when mercenary groups such as Blackwater are able to operate without sufficient legal or logistical oversight. Then after this, Prince left the firm, and of course, as I mentioned before, they changed their name a couple times. Many thought that they'd seen the end of Eric Prince, but he resurfaced later at the helm of a different private military company. So then they go on to speak of Prince's time in the United Arab Emirates, where he was appointed by the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi to make a secret private army. For this, he was paid $529 million. Pretty good work if you can get it. In documents obtained by the New York Times, the mission of this privately commissioned battalion included intelligence gathering, urban combat, the securing of nuclear and radioactive materials, humanitarian missions, and special operations to destroy enemy personnel and equipment, of course, and crowd control. Prince hired Colombians and the nationals of other countries thousands of miles away to fill his ranks for two reasons. And I did do a piece, actually, a little while ago, I think about a year and a half ago, on these mercenaries being brought in to fight in Yemen. First, Prince was looking to pay them as little as possible. Second, they weren't Muslims, because Prince surmised that Muslims could not be trusted to kill other Muslims. I have no words for that. A few years later, in 2015, Saudi Arabia began its military intervention in Yemen and recruited a host of other Arab nations to join its coalition. Abu Dhabi's crown prince, a business partner to Eric Prince, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, signed up for the cause in order to destroy any creeping Iranian influence in the war-torn nation. I'm not going to speak about the Iran thing right now, but if you will look at some of my work on what's going on in Syria and going on in Yemen, you will see that as a kind of perennial villain, Iran's malign influence has been exaggerated. So then they go on to speak of Yemen. Eric Prince and his UAE private military firm helped recruit and train over 1,000 soldiers from Latin American countries. Now, we of course have to think of the human rights records of many of these soldiers from places like Colombia, where, I mean, they were fighting an insurgency for a long time. Many crimes were committed on all sides. These are not the type of people who should be sent to a country where they have absolutely no understanding of the language or the culture. Prince's initial battalion, you could say the same thing about professional armies as well from the West. You could say the same thing about the Americans who invaded Iraq, had absolutely no idea of the culture of Iraq, had absolutely no idea of the traditions of Iraq, had absolutely no idea of the fact that this is pretty much the oldest civilization in the world that still stands. But nonetheless, I believe, as much for oil and for profit as anything else, and profit for the arms manufacturers, that this was why we invaded Iraq. This is why we invaded Libya. Although Canada actually wasn't involved in the invasion of Iraq, but Western countries in general have been garrisoning these countries to extract profit and not out of any kind of moral concern. And the use of mercenaries proves this. So, sorry, I'm getting a little bit upset, but Prince's initial battalion of 800 soldiers had blossomed into almost 2,000 specialized troops, hired mostly from Latin America to do the UAE's business. Although officials say Eric Prince's formal business role with the UAE had ended several years before the intervention into Yemen, his corporate blueprint to partially outsource the UAE's military is doubtlessly still in use. The UAE keeping and even expanding Prince's blueprint for private outsourced army demonstrates just how influential he and his mercenary business model has become. They then go in to talk about how he has been outfitting crop duster planes in Azerbaijan to basically to bomb Armenians in an area which is called Nagorno-Karabakh. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Also called the Republic of Artsakh. Prince wanted to show the government two crop duster planes meant for agricultural use but refitted for military purposes. The planes were meant to be outfitted with state-of-the-art surveillance technology and were supposedly able to fire missiles. Actually, just full disclosure, they never made it to Azerbaijan after an investigation shut the sale down. This is because the deal may have broken several laws. The Washington Post found that executives were concerned that the company might be skirting U.S. law, known as International Traffic in Arms Regulations, ITAR, requiring Americans to obtain special permits before defense-related technology can be transferred to foreign countries. And now, not to be stopped from his plan to privatize air operations, Prince went to Eastern Africa. His group, Frontier Services Group, which is now mostly owned by the Chinese government, has been providing security and logistical help to Eastern African countries such as South Sudan, Kenya, Somalia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. When you want logistics done in Africa, you call DHL, said Sean McFate, a former military contractor in Africa and current expert on mercenaries at the Atlantic Council. When you want muscle, you call Eric Prince. One of FSG's ventures appears to help oust the extremist military group, appears to be, I think they mean, extremist militant group Al-Shabaab from southwest Somalia, an area that is largely controlled for years. We have brought together strong international business leaders to team up with talented Somali entrepreneurs to make development in southwest Somalia a reality, an FSG statement reads. The project will include an integrated solution of air, land, sea logistics capabilities and advanced security management. Now, Somalia is an interesting case simply because there was a victory by a group called the Islamic Courts. They were Islamists, kind of in the mold of the Muslim Brotherhood. But this was unacceptable, mostly to Western countries. So we used Uganda, I believe Ethiopia, in order to overthrow this government, which was bringing some stability to this poor, ravaged nation, and overthrew them. And in the process created this group Al-Shabaab, which simply means the youth. They are much more militant. I think they're either aligned with Al-Qaeda. They might be aligned with the Islamic State group, but I believe they're still aligned with Al-Qaeda. I might be wrong on that. So as I said, Prince then went to China. His firm, Frontier Services Group, is now owned pretty much by CITIC, a Chinese government-owned investment firm. The Chinese are gradually taking more control of the company. CITC is now playing a larger role as Frontier's dominant shareholder, said a man named Jin, who is not quoted before, who heads the International Security Defense College that trains security personnel and is overseen by FSG. Prince's share is decreasing. The Chinese are in charge, so it won't matter. Now, even in this alone, there's much to criticize about the Chinese government. They sometimes behave with their own people in ways that are inexplicable. Once you allow privatized war, you are going to find more and more countries will see the advantage in this. So, Human Rights Watch accused the Chinese government of deploying a predictive policing program using massive surveillance technology and a web of high-tech surveillance cameras and compulsory data collection. I mean, the dangers here are just unbelievable. So, the list above, only details a few of Eric Prince's ventures and does not include an attempt by Prince to send thousands of mercenaries into Afghanistan. However, Prince has transformed battlefields everywhere and fundamentally altered the way governments construct security apparatuses. Iran is now heavily reliant on outsourced Afghani mercenaries to be cannon fodder in the war in Syria. Russia is supplementing its own intervention into Syria with mercenaries hired by the state-backed Wagner Group, who also sends troops to Ukraine. To beat back the nascent extremist group Boko Haram, Nigeria hired private apartheid-era security forces from South Africa to do the job. Thanks to Eric Prince, outsourcing military and intelligence labor is now the norm, and it shouldn't be, and it never should be.